This is the 21.5 Show.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Whether you're a professional pilot or want to be one, you're in the right place.
Let's get started.
Join professional aviators Dylan and Max as they talk their experience in the airlines, business aviation, and more.
Life is good.
Industry experts, unique stories, and plenty of fun. This is the 21.5 Show.
Here we go.
And now, back to the show, we have James Onieal, the man who guides us like a lighthouse in the fog through the tumultuous times in aviation.
The Sherpa on the mountaintop.
Dude, you're scaring the young kids. You're making them think it's bad out there. They're only walking to school uphill one way. Jesus.
The shepherd of the herd.
That's right.
All right, that's going to
Our
get me a
master.
little egotistical on that one.
That's right. Welcome back, James. Hello. Lots to talk about today. Let's start with an email from a listener. And I picked this one because we're getting a lot of emails just like this. People are stuck, right? They're stalled out. Let's hear from this listener to kind of get an idea of what's going on. This is for a current Allegiant pilot. They say our contract was ratified on August 1st of 2016 and became amendable on July 29th of 2021. Immediately following ratification, nearly every other airline signed a much better contract. Then an even more impressive contract was signed by every other airline more recently. This puts Allegiant realistically 2 contracts behind. We are unified in negotiating for an industry standard contract, putting us on the same level as our industry counterparts, operating a mixed fleet of Airbus and Boeing. A 12-year topped-out captain here is making FO pay nearly anywhere else. Is it time to give up on this place? FOs that left for legacy carriers 2 or more years ago are now captains at their legacies. So we've got a ULCC pilot that's frustrated about contracts, but then we have other ULCC pilots are worried about bankruptcies and other things. So let's kind of tackle this from multiple angles. First, James, can you provide any thoughts for a specific Allegiant pilot right now?
So I actually think we got to go a little further back than that.
Okay.
So we got to be real careful when we use the phrase industry standard, right? Because, so let's say you're an Allegiant pilot. Do you consider the standard all their ultra low cost carriers, right? Because if you take a look at how the business models are doing for ultra low cost across the country and the world right now, right? A lot of them aren't doing too hot. Do you consider the industry aviation as a whole, in which case you're doing a lot better than a flight instructor is, right? You're paid a little bit more per hour and you at least have a monthly guarantee, right? Or when you say industry standard, are you really comparing yourself against where you want to be, which is in this case, let's call it a legacy carrier just to make it easy. And so when we use that phrase industry standard, typically that's kind of code for whatever the highest paid dude is. Right? That's not the standard. Right. That's the deviation to the standard, right? Okay. And it's not, I don't think it's a recipe for happiness to compare an ultra low cost contract to a legacy contract. Now, let's use Allegiant as an example, right? So they have an out and back model, right? And if you live in the base that you're flying out of, right, you get a perk that your legacy airline counterparts don't get.
That's what I was literally thinking when he said, I'm like, well, industry standard's not being home every night, bro.
Yeah.
You got to factor those things in,
look,
right?
I want to be clear on this. Look, we can turn this into like kind of bashing people. That's not actually what the point of this is. But this concept of industry standard, this pops up in conversations probably 5-10 times a day. And really what the person is trying to orient themselves towards is what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what should I be thankful and happy for, and what should I be pissed about is really what they're trying to search for, right? But to your point, Max, right? Industry standard is actually not being home every night. Now, that's great if you're flying for Allegiant and you're at a base that you actually live in. Right. But let's say you've got a base out in the middle of nowhere that you don't live in, so you're commuting to it. Well, that lack of industry standard, that being home every night, is now crushing you. It's increasing your costs, right? Because you got crash pad, you got food,
Sure.
you got gas. If you're taking a look at that contract compared to a legacy airline, right? You're looking at like, well, man, they're getting per diem, plus they're getting their hotels, so they're not having to pay for that at home. Plus their pay is also a lot better than ours is, and in their retirement, so on and so forth. So when we take a look at that industry standard, it is almost a case-by-case basis of how does this fit for your family, right? If you're out of the XYZ base and that's a place you actually want to live and it's a place your family lives and you're coaching T-ball every day of the week or on weekends and during the week, you're sitting down doing math homework and freaking going over spelling words. I don't even know if you teach kids spelling anymore. With autocorrect. I don't even know if that's a thing. With AI coming to replace all of us. But then what we're really making a decision over is, hey, is that quality of life with your family? Which, look, you can't put a direct dollar value on. That's an internal intrinsic value, right? Is that worth the pay difference? But look, if you go to an Allegiant or you go to a Frontier, or you go to a Spirit, and your objective was to have United or Delta compensation, you were set up for disappointment. At that point, we're just playing a game of, okay, do I want to equal what a 3 or 5 year 737 or Airbus captain would have made, or like what's the equivalent? But it's not a, and quite frankly, I mean, Max, even to compare Southwest to United or Delta is not going to be a one for one. And I'm not talking about in terms of better or worse. I'm just talking about how the business model works, how efficient you can be.
It's just a different animal. Yeah.
What you guys can do with your scheduling is nowhere near industry standard. And I mean that in the most positive sense of the word, right? So I think when we use the term industry standard, we got to be really careful as to what's the standard that we're comparing ourselves against. Because if you take Allegiant, you compare them to Frontier and Spirit, they're doing decent right now, right? Like, but if you secretly really want to be at United or Delta, then there's going to be a lot of tension because you're going to be unhappy because your contract compared to that standard is behind, and it's the further you get behind, you're not going to catch up to that all of a sudden until some massively negative event happens where those people get a massive. Typically what happens is the people at the top come down to the bottom to meet you. You don't necessarily come from the bottom up to the top to meet them, if that makes any sense. So when
it does, if you read Hard Landings.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, and
it reminds me of, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, just think about like, dude, Southwest post September 11th. I mean, people were giving up children to get a job there, right? Southwest had a good 15-year run where they were it, right? That's where everybody wanted to be. The pay was better, the schedule, everything was basically better, right? And now, we have this kind of craziness that we're going through, and that's kind of changed. So it's going to ebb and flow in terms of where you fit. So I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah. So it seems like, as usual, your theme is you have to sit down with every person and for them to be able to outline their specific goals to figure out what they want. So in general, like you're saying for this Allegiant pilot that wrote in, like, yeah, if you're going to compare yourself to a legacy pilot, you're going to have a bad time.
Well, I think the other thing too is there always gets this sentiment of like, to the uninformed is like, oh, this is the place to go. Like there's always the place to go. Right. And there's not the place to go for everybody because it's so person dependent on what your life is like, where you live, what you want to do, what you're at, there's that's obviously what you always say is you got to find the right fit for you. And there is no industry standard also to your point. I mean, there's certain things, there's pay and there's certain things that, you can draw lines across, but there's so many differences too between each carrier and each job. And, even those jobs within each carrier, depending if you're on the narrow body or wide body, whatever. So
the
dynamic,
the part that people lose sight of, and this is something that one of my mentors has given me. So this is completely stolen. I did not come up with this on my own. But there is more than one way to live a life. And what gets confusing to people is they're trying to figure out like what's the path, and it's not. this is like cooking. It's like, how much of being home do you want and need? How much of salary do you actually need? How much of healthcare do you need? How much? And so they're looking at it as a one size fits all. But like, for example, with an Allegiant pilot, the place that I would start is, are you even in a base that you want to be in? Because if the answer is no, I understand why they're pissed. Right? Like, then
that's torture.
The standard that they're looking at in the industry is, this is not a good deal for me, right? And so now what we're doing is we're talking about, okay, hey, look, what's the strategy to either get you into a base where you want to live or how to get you into a different company? If the person is living in a base that they want to live in, then you go, okay, well, so these are some of the intangibles that this is a reason of why people go to Allegiant. So now we got to figure out what is really that amount of money that's enough. And most people do not sit down and calculate how much is enough. And so once they hit a new level and then, okay, now I want more. Now I want more. Now I want more. And when you sit down and you go, okay, like, why? What are you going to do with it? Sometimes people have a really good reason, right? And it's like, hey, look, man, I'm behind on my retirement, or my kids are going to college, or I've got a sick family member, or I really, really, really need a boat. Whatever, I don't care, right? But they've got a reason for that money. And a shocking amount of times, and you go, hey, what are you going to do with the money? And they kind of stare at you and they're like, I just don't like that that I'm so far behind my buddies. And that's, by the way, okay. Like, it's not one of those things like, well, get over it. It's like, no, that's a really serious.
It's an honest.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But we got to know what that is to solve the right problem. Because otherwise you're going to change companies and you're going to find out you hate it there too. And then it gets scary.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it used to be you just went to who called you first.
Yeah.
Like you didn't. It was simpler in a way, because when things weren't like this, you would just go to who called you first, and that was it. And you figure out how to work with what you had. And now, when you have so much more opportunity, or had, or whatever, will have again, I guess. You can really be like, oh, well, maybe this is the right fit for me, and you can really analyze it. But it does take a lot more thought, I think, than filling out all the applications and waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that you would get hired, and by the time you got called by another carrier, you had 2 or 3 years seniority wherever you were at, so it wasn't worth leaving. Now, that's not the case, right? This is kind of like, when I think about career progression, this is what it must have been like when British Airways got rid of the Concorde and all those pilots had to downgrade back to the Airbus. You're like, hey, this thing doesn't quite move as fast as the other thing. It's like people get used to a certain speed and a certain kick in the pants on the acceleration, right? And then all of a sudden you get shifted down to something else that doesn't quite move that fast, which is basically the hiring market right now. And people go, holy shit, there's something wrong with this thing. And you're like, no, it's a fucking A320. I mean, it's nothing wrong. It's actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just not a Concorde.
To do, right?
Yeah.
Well, and to the other side of the token too, you could go somewhere, make the wrong decision, go to where it wasn't the right fit for you, and then decide you wanted to leave, and then you could have a do-over. Where again, that wasn't necessarily the case,
an option,
and you had to learn. But it's a lot easier to just analyze things appropriately and make the right decision in the first place. Only go through one initial, be on first year pay only for 1 year.
The other part of it though that people are losing sight of, and we've talked about this before, but dude, this is just like marriage, man. You're settling down. Like every day Eileen wakes up and looks over and sees me, she knows she's settled. The question is, did she...
Big exhale.
God, I could finish that sentence so many different ways.
She wakes up in the morning, she looks over, and she goes, I 100% settled. And every day, she's got to convince herself that what she settled for was enough. Right? That's it.
Do you mind getting her real quick? So we can talk
quickly.
about that
We've got a special guest to join us here. Go ahead.
Coming in and tell
I could.
what she thinks of her life choices.
You started me out with the leader of the flock. By the time the friggin' podcast is over, I'll be some guy walking around an empty lot. So.
Okay, now let's shift gears a little bit, James. We get that there's some times when you're able to. Let's say we had somebody that actually picked the carrier they wanted to be at. They went to Spirit. They were in base. They liked the model. They liked the company. They like everything. But now
they're like yellow.
Yeah, right. They like
Yeah.
yellow.
All the things.
They love the Airbus. But now they have to think about a tactical move. I made a plan. It maybe is not working out, or maybe it will. We're getting a lot of emails from Spirit FOs and captains both that have really stagnated, and then they're maybe even seeing
It's backward
backward movement. Is this it's just a rough patch, just hang in there and stay the course? Or at what point are these people going to have to be like, no, it's time to go?
Yeah. So when we talk about stagnating, if anybody has seen the movie Office Space, and if you haven't, just watch the opening scene. It's about 3 minutes. It's a guy sitting in traffic, right? And so he's in the left lane, and there's 500 cars in front of him, and he's sitting there dead stop, and the guy off to his right, they start kind of inching forward, right? 1 car passes, 2 car passes, 3 car passes. He finally gets pissed, and he goes, F this, and he goes to switch over to the right lane. And right as he switches over to the right lane, that lane stops, and the lane he was in starts moving.
Yeah, it starts moving.
And so now he watches 2 or 3 cars, and he gets ticked off, and he goes back into that lane. As soon as he gets in the lane, that lane stops, and the lane back to his right starts moving again, right? And this goes on and on and on for whatever, probably a minute of the movie. There's much better music to it than what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So,
I guess
so when we talk about stagnation, typically people are doing that in reference to what's happening around them, right? So this is going to sound a little esoteric, but when you get hired by Southwest, or you get hired by United, or you get hired by Delta, right? And you become a captain on a fleet, you've technically stagnated, right? Like you get to United, you sit there as an FO, 2 years later, you become a captain on the 7-3, and now you're going to be on the 7-3 for the next, 5 or 10 years because your schedule, whatever, you technically stagnated for 10 years, right? Okay. But everyone's okay with that stagnation because it holds a certain amount of status in the industry, you pretty color, now your new favorite color is blue, you could sit in the front left, which has a completely different view than the front right, which is, 12 inches to the right. Now, instead of the flight attendants ignoring you, now they look at you and then ignore you, right? Whatever. Okay. So when we take a look at stagnation, we have to be really careful are we actually stagnating, or are we just stagnating compared to what we're looking at going on around us, right? You take a look at the hiring at the legacies, that's slowed down. So that means if you're on one of those seniority lists, you're not gaining as much seniority as you were, right? Okay. Depending on what's going to be happening with aircraft deliveries, you may see upgrades slowing down, right? Okay, everyone is slowing down from where they were. Is that going to last forever? No, it's not. It's going to pick back up as soon as we have aircraft deliveries and a couple of other things. Okay. So in the meantime, though, if we take that Spirit pilot, what they have to really ask themselves is, would I rather sit through 18 or 24 months here, or and potentially, suffer, right? Or would I like to jump ship and increase the suffering to go someplace else? It's a game of, am I going to suffer more for staying, or am I going to suffer more for leaving? Now, if you're an FO on the bottom 20% of the seniority list, that's not a very hard discussion, right? I mean, that's like, hey, dude, just leave, right? Like, now their problem is a lot of those guys got hired at bare minimum flight times, and they were not, when I say bare minimum, I'm talking like restricted ATP minimums, right? And they got hired there, and they didn't fly a ton. So now you could be in a situation where, say somebody got hired with something like restricted ATP minimums, and now they only have 100 hours in the Airbus, and now they have trouble getting a regional job, right? Because that's how much it shifted, right? Okay, so for them, there's some experience building. But if you're a captain, right, now you got to look at whether you're a captain that's getting downgraded, or are you staying a captain and you're just getting more junior than you were, so you can't hold the base in the schedule you wanted. You're like, okay, well, is it really worth giving up all that seniority to jump someplace else to be at the bottom of the seniority list, potentially not at the base you want, not getting the schedule you want, so on? That's where that strategy comes into play over, because they're looking at right now it'll be better. Okay, but what happens in 18 months or 24 months or 36 months and things are going okay, right? Then was it worth that jump? You don't know, right? You can watch what Delta and United are saying in the news right now. Spirit, everyone has a scope on Spirit, right? Meaning a sniper scope on Spirit, right? Like, it's not going to be a fun ride over there, probably. My crystal ball's in the shop, so maybe I'm completely wrong and it'll be amazing. But just when you listen to Ed Bastian in the news and you listen to Scott Kirby, they basically talk about they don't say the company names, but they're basically talking about American and Spirit, right? And they talk about, hey, if you're not profitable right now, if you're doing this or you're doing that, or you're making this adjustment to your business model. So that's why a lot of these guys are stressed, because they're trying to predict the future over like, how bad is this going to get? Should I jump ship now? And yeah, it's going to be suffering, but it's going to be better medium to long term. Or am I really shooting myself in the foot by jumping?
Yeah,
well,
so it's impossible to predict too, because the big shift too of the airline customer has been the price sensitivity, shift. Whereas it used to just be, it was the cheapest ticket you could get. That was by far and away number one. Now that's not it. People want choices, and they want premium. They want a myriad of different choices. The option of premium or the option of the cheapest ticket. And so that's where, that's made it tough for the low cost carriers and even Southwest. We haven't evolved quite as quickly as we should have. Now we're offering assigned seats and going to offer premium seating and things like that to meet that need and the change in the consumer. So not only the industry as a whole, but does that sentiment shift with economically if things tighten up, and then people all of a sudden become a lot more price sensitive, and then you have these ultra low cost carriers that have a price advantage.
So that was kind of the the rule of thumb, but the problem was a problem. What you had was a relatively uneducated consumer, right? So they would go on to xyzlowcostcarrier.com and they would see a whatever $19 ticket price, and they would go, "Holy, I'm going to fly from I'll use Columbus,
Detroit to Fort Lauderdale.
Detroit to Fort Lauderdale for $39, right?" And then you get to the airport and, well, you got to pay for luggage. And then, hold on a second. You got to pay to use, you got to pay for a soda, and you got to pay for this, and you got to pay for that. And yeah, when you bundle the whole cost together, it still is cheaper, right? But when they started getting hit with those costs, they started going, yeah, I'd rather just do the kind of the all-in-one. And you have issues with frequency, right? So, hey, how easily can a Spirit or a Frontier or an Allegiant recover if an airplane goes down? Right. So I'll use, and this is not to kind of crap on them, but I have a next door neighbor that flew Breeze from Columbus, Ohio to West Palm Beach, because they have literally a house in Columbus, Ohio and West Palm Beach. And it was the first time ever, but they were like, hey, this is great. It was the only direct flight. And, so it's a 12-minute drive from where we live to the airport. 10 minutes later, you're sitting in the terminal, and then literally West Palm Beach, right? They canceled the flight. Well, it was like a Tuesday. They weren't going to get on another flight for like a week before they could get them rebooked. So they turned and they said, I'll never fly them again. Well, why not? Well, because if something happens, I can't get there for a week. So now they fly Delta on a connection through Atlanta. They will intentionally book a connection through Atlanta because they know, hey, look, if something happens, they can send me through Detroit, they can send me through New York, they can send me through Atlanta. There's a lot more frequency. I can buy a seat up front, yada, yada, yada. So when you take a look at, we're coming out of coronavirus, all the stimulus, I don't want to say all the stimulus money, but a lot of the stimulus money has been spent, right? So now you have the people that are traveling are the ones that have the money. And the ones that have the money typically want a more premium experience. And so it's shifting what the type of traveler is, and it's hurting the business model. And that's why you're seeing, if you read any of the news about Spirit or Frontier or even Delta, United American, and all their moves are in the premium space. How are they adding more leg room? How are they adding bigger seats? How are they, Southwest with the assigned seating, right? They're all making changes into the premium market.
And I think the other underrated thing too is how quickly is the management team willing to change to the demand of the market? And I think we're starting to see that play out, where I feel like there are some airlines that can say, "Oh, this is what people want, and we can deliver this quicker than some other ones." And so,
well, it's a little more complicated than that, though.
Yeah,
because it's not only how fast is the management team willing to adjust, it's how quickly can Boeing and Airbus Let's say, I'm not saying that this is what they would do, right? But let's say Spirit decided, hey, you know what, we want to add in lie flat seats in the front of the airplane, right? I don't know why Spirit would do that, but let's just say they decided they want to add lie flat seats, right? Okay. How are they going to do it? Right? Can they get the airplanes in? Can they get them serviced? Can it, like, it's right now, it's very hard to get things done. You can take a look at anybody that's, take a look at what's happening with Allegiant right now in the 737s. Right? It's a tough game right now if you're trying to make adjustments to your fleet or anything like that. So these CEOs are having to make decisions within the constraints of how quickly the supply chain can move. I would not want to be in those meetings right now.
Wonder if they're going to write Hard Landings 2. I mean, what an incredible book of the last 20 years.
This isn't even bad, though. Like, we're still going to have 5,000 pilots. We're going to have around, it's hard to project because the numbers are bouncing up and down, but we're probably going to have around 5,000 pilots hired, maybe 4,500 pilots hired this year, which I get is less than half that was hired last year. But still, if you go back historically to like 2000, I know people are tired of history lessons. 5,000 is a lot of pilots to get hired.
This is banging still. Yeah.
You're going to start, we're already seeing certain regionals are starting to pick up their hiring for first officers, not just direct entry captains. I would expect into the fourth quarter, you're going to see more of that. Right now, given for the guys that read the article that I wrote this Saturday about American, my focus would be on the United and Delta regionals for right now. We'll see how long it takes for the American regionals to really start picking back their hiring up at a meaningful amount, right? I don't know if that's going to be in the first quarter, second quarter of next year.
You're saying that because you think the United and Delta carriers are going to hire first, or you think it's better to go there because if you're trying to get to American, you won't get.
I think they're going to hire. I think it's in capitals, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So don't edit the "I think" portion out of this, so people make it sound like I made a prediction.
James says.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the United and Delta regionals will uptick their FO hiring faster than the American ones will.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of I think one's better or not than the other, but
okay.
You go take a, the funny thing is I was online yesterday, and if you run the monthly guarantees, I think, and once again, I think it was Commute Air was the lowest paid. I think at like $74 an hour. I think Mesa was the highest paid at like 101. Most of them were in like the $90 an hour range as an FO, right? You're talking 70, 75, 85, $90,000 a year job first year as an FO. It's not, I mean, you get into the right seat, you're building PIC time. Sorry, you're building SIC time. You're getting exposure to thunderstorms. You're getting exposure to icing. You're getting exposure to ramp control and a whole bunch of other things you get at Class B airports you don't get at other ones, right? But as those regional airlines start to flex up their hiring, because remember, if United and Delta and American cannot get Airbuses and Boeings, right, but they can profitably capture the demand, well, guess what? You put regional jets on the route. Well, the limit to the regional jets right now is just how many direct entry captains can I get? Well, that's why you've been seeing these classes of direct entry captains have been going through the roof, right? Okay, cool. Well, now as they get their direct entry captains stabilized, guess what? Now they can start bringing in FOs, which is great because every FO or regional airline hires is one less pilot you're competing against, right, to go to some corporate operator. It's one more CFI job that's created, right? It's one less person that you're competing against when additional regionals open up, right? That's that kind of the bottom. When I say bottom end of the market, I don't mean bottom end in terms of bad. I mean those entry level jobs. As soon as those start to break open, it starts to get easier for those guys, which is why the folks that we're working with have been angling towards these jobs now for a couple of months, and they're angling at it aggressively, and their hard work's going to pay off because they've been establishing the relationships and they're staying in contact and they're doing the thing. I'm not going to tell you exactly what they're doing, but they're doing the things that they need to do so that all of a sudden when you see on the internet their picture on LinkedIn or Facebook of like, oh, I got a job with X, everyone's 6 months behind and trying to figure out how they do that.
Yeah, that's the other big email we continue to get is from these stagnated CFIs as well.
This is only scary if you don't know what to do. If you know what you're doing, it's not actually very scary.
And in the big picture, like you said, it's more of they will hire again. It's just where are you going to be at in line when
they will?
When
but here's the problem. When all of a sudden let's just use military pilots as an example, right? They had in their mind over the past couple of years, like, well, I'm not going to a regional, I'm not going to an ultra low cost, I'm going straight to a major. Great. Okay, cool. And there are some pilots that from the military that will be able to do that, right? The ones that have 1,500 hours, right? But all the ones that are below 1,500 hours, right? Their plans have changed in terms of, hey, how are they going to navigate getting to that legacy? And so now these CFIs are competing against pilots that they weren't historically competing against, right? Now you're competing against maybe a fixed wing, a military pilot's got 800, 900 hours, right? Maybe you're competing against a rotary transition pilot, same thing, 800, 900, 1,200 hours, right? So these CFIs are having to compete against people that they historically were not competing against because those guys had the opportunity to go straight to the legacy. Well, once the legacies cut back on their hiring, when those guys separate from the military, meaning they didn't retire, they only did 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, 15 years, however many years they did, right? When they leave the military, they don't get a pension. So they need a job. They need healthcare and they need income, right? And guess what? Anybody that has a family or responsibility to another person, when you get kicked, when you have a choice of being able to produce income or not, you'll take whatever job you can get to produce that income. And a $90,000 a year job's not a bad job. I don't care if it's on a regional jet. A $90,000 a year job is a good job. And if you don't believe me, go talk to normal people. Walk into a Home Depot, go to a Starbucks, right? Walk into the library and go ask normal, real people that work for a living, hey, if I paid you to work 12 days a month, $90,000 a year, I paid for your hotels and paid for your meals, would you take it? And they're going to look at you and go, what's the catch?
You got to wear a tie.
They're good jobs.
The uniform.
Yeah. They're good jobs. And that's why people are competing so hard for them right now, because they are. I get it. Over the past 2 years, people had a very unique opportunity where they got to skip those jobs. But now we're just back to normal, where guess what? You go to a stepping stone, and that's okay.
Let's take a time out from our conversation to talk about another friend of ours, Timothy P. Pope, who's a certified financial planner dedicated to guiding professional pilots through smart financial planning. Whether it's saving for retirement, investment management, a seamless military transition, or strategic tax planning, Tim is your trusted financial partner. Join Tim as he leads engaging discussions on personal finance strategies for professional pilots on the Pilot Money Podcast. Timothy P. Pope, helping professional pilots make the most out of life.
Okay. James, a couple other things. Any other big things you're dealing with your clients right now? Like, are there any other hot topics beyond sort of the competitive landscape and maybe the seniority list switching?
Yeah, there's kind of three main areas that we're working with people right now on. So the first is, right, people shooting out resumes here and nothing back. The second is you're going to interviews, you getting thanks but no thanks. And the third is you got something in your background you don't know, hey, is this a deal killer or not? Now the funny thing with the resumes is people go, I'm shooting out resume after resume and I'm not getting any interviews. And usually the first question I ask is, okay, when you shoot in that resume, is somebody sending you a rejection or are they just ghosting you? And they're like, oh, they're just ghosting me. I'm like, all right, you haven't even gotten to the point of rejection yet, right? Like, you know, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, did it make a sound? Right? Yeah. If you shoot in a resume and nobody ever saw it, does that count as applying? So the first is everyone's trying to figure out how do you attract attention. And most people do it very, very transactionally, so it doesn't work. Once they can get kind of through that hurdle and figure that out, and there's a lot of different kind of strategies and tactics that we use for that, then you're going into the interviews actually really competitive, right? And for the exact reason that you said, right? You have people, let's say an Allegiant pilot, let's say a Spirit pilot that's looking to move, right? Maybe you got somebody that's in corporate that's now looking to move, right? So the competitive set is much higher than it used to be. So when you show up, these recruiters have been eating this crap sandwich over the past 2 years of people just tell them what they think they want to hear and, hey, I'm going to stay here, but they're really going to use it as a stepping stone to go someplace else. So you've really got to be on your A game when you walk into these interviews to explain, hey, number one, what am I actually bringing to the table? And number two, do I actually want to be here? And then lastly, if you... Hold on. I wanted to pause just for a second. When you were saying the corporate guys are moving, as a side note, are you seeing... What's the change in the corporate pilots trying to leave their current jobs? Have you noticed a difference? Like a lot of corporate guys went to the airlines the last few years. Would you say you're still seeing that strong,
or are guys starting to go, maybe I'm happy where I'm at?
There were a lot of the corporate pilots that wanted to do it because they didn't have any experience in that arena, and it looked really, really good. So it was the best time ever to try it to see if they liked it. Okay. There was a percentage of those people that got to those legacy carriers that decided, yeah, I actually like this. There's also a percentage of those people that have gotten to the legacy carriers and gone, this is not what I thought it was. And so when the race to get there is going and everybody's moving, it's really, really exciting. So you're getting that dopamine hit of I've accomplished something, right? But back to my marriage example about settling down, about 9 months to a year in, right? When kind of all the novelty is worn off, that's when people really find out, hey, do I want to stay here or not? So what that means, though, as well, is the corporate pilots that didn't make that jump yet, there's a lot of them that have been looking at it over the past couple of years that are now like, I think I'm good. I'm going to stay here. Right.
And their buddies from their flight department or whatever have gone, and then they're kind of getting more of the straight story.
Precisely. And when you say straight story, it's not that the airline that they went to is bad. It's just that it wasn't perfect. Right? Because the story that was sold over the past 2 or 3 years was that, hey, there's this perfect oasis in the desert, right? Unicorns and rainbows and cotton candy. And there is no place that can live up to that expectation. So you've had this kind of realigning of reality where people are now starting to more closely reevaluate. Do I actually like where I'm at, or do I really actually want to leave? But what that
plus a lot of the corporate pilots have enjoyed pay raises because of those people that did leave too. So the delta has closed at some places.
That is correct. And a lot of corporate pilots don't commute, so they're looking at their buddies commuting, and you're not dealing with fistfights in the back of the airplane unless you have a really, really tough account, right? There's a lot of things you don't deal with that, folks are like, well, hey, I'm comfortable where I'm at. But once again, that if you think about that, that's why when we talk to folks, it's like, hey, the hiring at United, Delta, and American dictates the hiring in the rest of the industry. Whether you want to go there or not is irrelevant. But when they're soaking up 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pilots a year, 7, 10, 13,000 pilots per year, that sucks people up out of the regionals. It sucks people up out of the ultra low cost. It sucks people up out of corporate, which means everybody all along the kind of ecosystem has the ability to move up, move down, and move laterally. When that stopped at the top, that kind of froze everybody in musical chairs. Everybody grab a seat, right? And it froze everybody in place. And that's where everyone takes a collective sigh and reevaluates. Is this actually where I want to be, or do I want to leave?
Yep. Have you seen your clients, or maybe just in general, because it's harder to get the job, are people taking training more seriously? Or have failures decreased?
No, they've not.
That's still...
but people weren't failing. So that's a big misnomer. Is people are not failing because they're not taking the training seriously. They're failing because the training programs are not training programs. They're checking programs. And so what that means is that if you went to an Embry-Riddle, if you went to a Purdue, if you went to a University of North Dakota, you were, and this is not an advertisement. So like, I'm just telling you what I'm getting from the clients that we're dealing with, right? If you went to one of those schools, right, all ATPs, right, they train you in the structure of what's going to happen when you get to that airline, right? So people understand the structure of the training. They understand what's going to happen in the training. They understand what is expected of them in the training. A lot of them have completed a jet transition course, so they've had some exposure to the simulator, how it works, flows, profiles, callouts, so on and so forth. Okay. So those guys, for the most part, the gap in what they have to put together when they get there is very small, right? But let's use like a military or a corporate pilot as an example. A corporate pilot goes in, right? Let's say they did part 61 instruction, 500 hours, got hired into a King Air, flew that to like 1,500 hours, and they got into an Excel in the right seat. And then they flew that to like maybe 2,000, 2,500 hours with the same guy the whole time, right? By the way. And now they're in the left seat of that citation Excel, and they've never had a flow, they've never had a profile, they never had a call out, right? Because you flew with the same two guys all the time. You just kind of knew, you could tell by the way the guy was shrugging his shoulders whether he was stressed, right? And now you're jumping into this environment. You're jumping into this environment where they're going to put you with a different person every week. That corporate pilot's coming in, they already know how to fly a jet, right? So they understand all the descent planning, energy management, so on and so forth. They're coming in knowing, okay, hey, I have to get up to speed on the flows, the profiles, and the call outs, right? Yada, yada, yada. So when they get into training, that's where they put their emphasis and their focus, right? Now you've got military pilots that are jumping in. Maybe they're not familiar with jet charts. Maybe they're a helicopter transition pilot, so they're not used to energy management of a jet, right? Or you have a CFI that maybe came up straight through Part 61, 1,500 hours, and they get hired, and they make it through basic indoc. They don't have any issues. They'll make it through systems. They'll usually have trouble with electrical. They'll have trouble with hydraulics. They'll have trouble with pneumatics, right? But not anything that they can't make it through. They go to the study groups in the evening.
Yeah.
Where they start to have the problem is in what they call the GFS, the graphical flight simulator. And now it's like, okay, they're not as crisp on the call outs as they need to be. Okay, cool. They'll make it, like the instructors will get you through that. Then they get into the simulator, automation usage, descent planning, and energy management is what's crushing them. V1 cuts are big issues as well.
It, it's like a Formula One race or the Tour de France. Everybody starts and everybody's together, and then a couple turns, and you get two things, and then people start to spread out, and there's definitely people that are ahead and people that are behind, and people start to get split up from their sim partners. That's a good analogy. Because people are not progressing at the same rate, and it's exactly what it looks like, and you see it like happen, right? You know, and it's and you see people struggling, and it's funny because anecdotally, I was just talking to a friend of ours who's a instructor at one of the fractionals in the airplane. So he does the in the airplane IOE.
Yeah, they can't do visual approaches.
They cannot do visual approaches. They cannot manage energy.
Nope, can't do it. And I'm actually taking clients that we've gotten hired, and I am sitting with them on Microsoft Flight Sim, and I am teaching it to them before they go into training so they pass. Because it breaks my heart to have someone work with us, and we get them all the way to the point to where they get hired, and then they fail out of training. Right, like so, I actually sit with them on Flight Sim or X-Plane and teach energy management, visual approaches, and stuff like that, so that when they get in, they have a leg up.
And the funny thing with the visual approaches too, it's not that people can't do it. You've done visual approaches your whole life.
It's the mental planning.
It's that, but it's also people just forget. Like with all of the procedures and turning here to intercept a glide path and the ILS and all of this stuff, people forget just how to just go back to basics and fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just look out the window. But fly a glide path that's 3 degrees by looking at it, and and it's hard because we all that's how we all started. It's how we learned, dude.
Yeah, but in all fairness, you did all your ratings in a Cirrus, right? So half of that was on autopilot. Now you go to your first regional where they put you in an Embraer 170 that has auto throttles, and basically the way they teach you is don't touch the thing. Just get the autopilot on as quick as you can and don't manually fly it. It's a really tough adjustment where you now see people using the wrong level of automation given in the situation that they're at. Something is decaying quicker than they're keeping up with. Guys don't know how to use speed brakes or thinking, hey, if you use speed brakes, you F something up. No, that's not true, right? They install them there for they just 80 to 90% of the failures are not due to the person not taking the training seriously or not showing up prepared. It's due to training is 10 pounds of shit, and it is literally a 10-pound bag. So if you need them, I have a really great client. I was talking to him the other day, and I won't give his name or the company that he was at. But he's in training, and he goes, we did like 3 V1 cuts, and then that was it in practice. And so he's turned to him. He's like, could I get like some more of these? Like, I don't think I'm not feeling comfortable with this. And they're like, now we need to move on. I've got to teach you this. And he's like, well, I'm completely comfortable with that. Like, I've got that down. I don't care. And they're like, nope, I got to go teach you that. And so he goes, I walked into the check ride. He goes 50-50 whether I was going to make it. And he passed it. But
that is not the mentality you want to have.
Going and you're just like, well, am I going to step on the correct rudder or not?
Well, no, because then he had a situation where it's exactly what Max is saying. Sim partner fell behind, right? And now you've got a situation where, okay, now your check ride's getting delayed. Are they going to swap your sim partner? And now you've been training with this guy the entire time, but now they're going to put in a seat fill. Or are you actually going to get the same? Like it's a disaster. And so these are all the things that happen behind closed doors that if you haven't been through training before, right? So if you haven't been through training before, you don't understand all the things that can go wrong. So you don't know when you're falling behind, right? And then all of a sudden you've practiced 8 sessions or something with somebody. Now you get in with the seat fill and the seat fill doesn't call positive rate. So you don't call gear up. Boom, failure. You're going, why is this thing not accelerating? Just get the gear down, right? Like, so that's, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's,
totally.
We've all been there. We've all been, and I've watched people that have been there just like they become a victim to the system, right? Because they get, for whatever reason, they had a weakness and it wasn't addressed correctly. And then all of a sudden they just go down this path. Exactly. They said, oh, well, then you're paired with somebody else that's behind, or you're paired with somebody you've never met.
And that's too, there's weak instructors. There's weak people that you're paired with. Sometimes there's,
or a new instructor every session.
New instructor,
or you have a strong sim guy who just keeps carrying you through the whole thing and doesn't help by letting people fail.
That's what was so interesting. Talking to our buddy that's an instructor at the fractional, and after talking to him, I think that is the hardest. They're taking CFIs at some of these fractionals. And they're like, okay, go fly a jet. And oh, by the way, it's going to be into uncontrolled airports, visual approaches, all these things that at least at a regional, usually it's ILS, big runway.
That's not the hardest thing. You know what the hardest thing is? It's the first captain that flies with that guy right after he passed IOE and doesn't know the guy just completed IOE.
Yeah.
So now you're showing up. You're not like, so the line check airman gets in the airplane and knows the guy's there to kill him, right? Day one of IOE, you know what to expect. Like, okay, I'm single pilot. Yeah. Don't let the guy, put him in a position for success, right? Yeah. Okay. Then all of a sudden you're a regular old line captain, upgraded at minimums, right? And you've got 101 hours in the jet, right? And now all of a sudden you got this person right off of IOE, right? And now you're realizing, I've got to give instruction. And that's what I hear from a lot of folks that are captains, that they're like, dude, it's tough, man. I'm not a flight instructor. And you're like, yeah, but the program is not structured to give these guys, it's structured to get them to a level of safety. It's not structured to get them to a level of competency or fluency. Right. And so it's a tough game.
I'll never forget my very first trip off of IOE as a captain in Chicago. Called in on ready reserve, and they're like, catch the last flight out. It was like 10 p.m. flight to Marquette, Michigan, which for American Eagle is the maintenance base. Yeah. Middle of nowhere in the winter.
Oh, God, snowing. That's horrible.
They're like, we need you to bring this airplane out of maintenance back to Chicago. You'll depart at, like midnight. And then I meet the FO because we're deadheading up there, and the kid was his first flight off IOE. Yeah. And it was like, and I'm just like, in the middle of the night, snowstorm, I do a maintenance airplane, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm up for this. And we went there, and I got there. I'm like, we're staying the night. We're going to go tomorrow when there's no storm. And that was my very first trip as a captain. I was like, there's too many error chain here. This is not good.
My first flight, 121, was a maintenance reposition flight from Manassas, Virginia to Dulles. Manassas is basically 5 miles south of Dulles. We took off north and landed north. My second flight was a revenue flight over to Columbus, Ohio. So we fly all these people. We get to Columbus. We land. And then as EFO, you got to go do a post-flight walk-around. And then we had this whiz wheel thing to calculate weight and balance. I don't know if anybody knows what those are, but whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to explain it. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, and I'm running the whiz wheel. I get the whiz wheel done. And I look back, and there's all these people sitting on the airplane. I turn to the captain. I'm like, hey, man, when's everybody going to get off? He goes, dude, we've offloaded the passengers, reloaded new passengers, offloaded the baggage, reloaded the baggage. I got the ATIS, I got the clearance, and I did the walk around for you. We're waiting on you. I was so far behind. I didn't even know the entire plane of people got off and a new group boarded. It felt like 3 minutes. It turned out it was about 35.
Yeah, isn't that dude? My first flight ever in a jet was from O'Hare to Kalamazoo.
Oh, that's nice. That's like a 9-minute flight.
Dude, I was, I remember after we pulled into the gate, I was my head was just, I was like, what just happened?
Where am I?
Like,
We're already here.
yeah.
And you need the passenger count?
Yeah.
We need a load closeout?
That was, and my mom was in the back.
Oh, yeah.
I
It
don't
was
think
the whole thing.
I don't think people understand how far you can get behind and how quick
Yeah.
it happens. Like, so you hear a lot of these stories, and or somebody gets first time into a jet and they take a look at the captain that they're flying with and they think like, oh, hey, they're really, really great. You're like, if you could see a video of that guy or girl on IOE, you wouldn't feel that way. Like, all of us had to go through that experience, right? But after you've been through that experience once, you now show up to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one, knowing how to prepare, right? And so that just, like I said, 80 to 90% of the failures are not attitude based. It's just the training program is not structured to give you a ton of remedial training. And it assumes you are coming in with a certain amount of knowledge that basically, if you didn't go through one of those structured university programs, the biggest complaint we get from the military people is that there's not enough structure in the 121 training, meaning it's not clear enough over what the expectation is. You know what I'm saying? Like they constantly feel like, hey, what's going to happen next? And then the CFIs, a lot of it's there's too much structure, meaning, hey, there's not enough freedom for me to kind of do it the way my brain works. You're like, no, it's not what they're paying you for. So
I feel
like to
like
paint this.
it's pretty well laid out, dude. Like, here's what you're going to do tomorrow. Like the whole syllabus, it tells you every step of the way, like what.
But not from a military standpoint, or think about
not,
they brief everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. It's a completely different.
So just because
the granularity of which they cover
if you go,
every movement in an airplane.
If you go into training and they go memorize your flows, your profiles, your call outs, and your limitations. And so they show up having all that memorized and like, what's going to happen in sim session 1? Okay, let's do the brief. We're going to tell you what's going to be done today. Yeah, but they didn't know 3 days before, so they could sit at home and study everything and walk through it and visualize it. And right, they've got a study system that is extremely thorough and very effective, but they have to know what to study before they show up. And some carriers do a very good job of basically giving you the syllabus ahead of time and going, here's everything that's going to happen. And a majority of them don't. Right. So if you think about it, if you've been to training at flight safety or simu flight, you know what to expect. You know how to study. You know what's going to happen next. But if you haven't been through that training before, they don't give you enough detail to study a week in advance. They just go, don't worry about it. You'll be okay. Don't worry. That'll get covered later. And you're like, later's not coming.
By the way, here's where the cafeteria is.
Yeah,
And here's your
yeah.
access key to the
here's
here's all the 9 fire escapes. This is where we
case
have
of-
every
yeah.
simulator
In case of
location in the country.
here's
Yeah.
the secure tornado
Yeah.
sheltering area. And all right, it's time for our first break.
First break.
Now we told you where the coffee machine
Yeah.
was and the donuts. So.
Yeah. And anybody listening who's been through that is laughing because that's exactly how it works.
And free lunches on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Wednesdays.
Pizza and cookies. Yeah.
This facility,
And
okay?
the-
Dallas is on Fridays. Here in Wilmington, it's Wednesdays.
And the thing is, it's not that any of the training is better or is really better or worse. It's just, what is the expectation of the person coming into the training so they can be successful? You and I know, okay, I'm not going to, day one, I am going to show up and I'm going to stare out the window while they talk about hurricanes and tornadoes and cookies and whatever, right?
Yeah.
I actually just sleep overtly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Very aggressive.
There's photographic evidence and,
Yeah.
and have no shame. I just
If you're coming in as someone who's never been through training before, that increases your anxiety because you're wasting time paying attention and taking notes on where the fire extinguishers are, not knowing if you're ever going to be tested
that
on
is
it.
funny. That does breed a lot of anxiety for
It
people
does.
when you sit there and you don't take notes.
Yeah.
I do
Oh,
all
yeah.
the time. People-
Your pencil's just
And then,
sitting
yeah,
there.
I'm just
and
like-
yeah, they're sitting next to a guy like you who to them seems like an arrogant douchebag. You're not. You just know exactly what's going to happen, and you're like, dude, this guy's got to read. He's going to read this slide to you whether you need it or not.
Yeah.
People are writing novels and you're
Yeah.
just like,
Oh, man.
so where do you want to go to lunch?
Yeah.
Well,
not
what day is it?
Wednesday.
What day
It's
is
not
it? Hold on.
Yeah,
Wow. Oh,
got to go
man.
put in for the raffle to go get the tickets to the local game. that
Yeah,
you're gonna
right.
get. Yeah.
How? Yeah. If you want to write something down, write down the instructions to make your custom luggage tag.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
funny.
yeah,
Training
exactly.
is such a mind
It is. I just had this conversation with a friend of ours that's going to training, and he's like, I've been studying for the last 4 weeks before I go to initial. Yeah. And it's the same talk that we give everybody. Is like, this is a marathon. If you burn yourself out before you show up, you ain't going to make it. It's just like the guy in the Tour de France that's pedaling as hard as he can in the first sector.
But it is so segmented by the groups of people because, like, I went in training initial, and it was June, and it was the summer, and we're at this huge hotel with a water park and a lazy river and swim up bar and this whole thing. And so we got there, and there's groups of people that have done this, like at the regionals, a regional captain, they've done the 121 thing, they know the program, whatever. And, I'd done it before and had a few type ratings. Yeah. And then there's like the guys out of the military and some of the corporate guys that didn't really know like what the program was. And so there's a group of us that just would go to the pool every day, and it was a free for all. The military guys are in the coffee shop studying like 20 hours a day because they just didn't know what else to do, so they just over prepared.
Well,
and
what ends up
in between.
But think about it this way, right? So think about it like an instrument scan. If you don't know what you should be looking at when, you're pinging around the cockpit looking at what's tuned into the radios, what's the airspeed indicator saying, what's the position of the flap indicator, that's what being in training for a military pilot is like. You have all this information, and I have no idea what I should be focusing on when. So you're on.
I love that analogy.
That's exactly
really
what it
good.
is. You're on an ILS approach, right? And you're looking at what the position of the lock on the window is in a Cessna 172, and you're like, you should probably look at the glide slope right now because you're right at glide slope intercept, right? So you're overloading them with information, and they don't know what of that information do I need to know, what of that information do I not need to know, and when am I going to need to know it? So they are in fight or flight mode, adrenaline pumping, trying to memorize as much as they can with no context as to when or how is this going to be used. Oh, and by the way, they're expecting someone to walk in at any moment and go, tell me X, Y, and Z, and they are terrified of not knowing the answer because in their world, that's not okay. In our world, we're like, just go get some more coffee. We'll talk about it again. So, but yeah, think about you're in a Cessna 172, you're on an ILS, and you're double checking to see if the paint is peeling on the marker for the landing light indicator.
How's the whiskey compass?
Exactly you're like, what the fuck are you looking at?
Pages and notes and stuff. Yeah. It's pretty funny because I remember I was walking back from the pool one day, and they're all studying, and I remember
studying and judging you.
My hands on the table. I'm like, guys. And I literally used the analogy you always say, this is a marathon, not a sprint.
But it makes it worse for them.
Chill out a little bit. Yeah, and come to the pool, which is funny because that didn't compute, and they're just like,
it's like turning to your kid that's freaking out and saying,
when everybody passed, and then we all go to the bar and have a beer to celebrate. They're like, you were right. We should have chilled a little bit more. That was but it's you kind of have to go through the process to then figure it out, and then I'm sure next time they're the guys on the lazy river. But
so what I do for them is I lay out the whole plan and go, here's exactly where you're at in training. Here's exactly what you need to focus on. Here's why. Here's how they're going to test it. And then when they're done, right, I was able to manage their emotional state through the entire training course. And then they end up not having the difficulties. When you tell someone,
for those listening, James is doing the puppet master hand signals.
Yeah, thank you,
James. I have training next month. Will you manage me?
Yeah.
Listen, flock. Listen. But it goes to the point that you were talking about, Max. With it boils down to emotion management. You have people freaking out in the freaking corner, going, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god," because they don't know what to focus on, so they focus on everything.
Yeah, that would stress.
That's
whew,
man. Well, this took an unexpected turn in the conversation, but I really enjoyed it, James. I think that was really helpful for some folks, and hopefully, people can kind of get a grasp of why it is important to talk to people that have been through this before, and lean on some experience. You're really teaching energy management in a sim to your clients. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that's
absolutely
full serve. That's a new feature.
What is the point of us getting you a job that you then fail out of? Like, I mean, come on. This is about taking care of people's families and making sure they have a successful career, right? When we say full service, right? We didn't do you any justice, right? If you end up having to go home to your family and go, you know that amazing job I just got? Just kidding. It's not here anymore. Hey, the term conditional and conditional job offer was actually the only word that mattered.
Yeah. I learned about that today.
Yeah.
James, before we get you out of here, anything else to put on folks' radar?
No, we did a lot of good talking today. I want to give something. I need to make sure you guys invite me back, so I can't give everything, right? You know?
No. There's always more.
Calm down, James, the prophet over here.
Yeah.
The Sherpa. There's always more.
James, how many airplanes will Boeing deliver next year? Go
Yeah,
ahead. Please,
exactly.
Tell us.
Jesus.
We're dying to know.
Well, it won't be any 777s. Don't worry about it.
Will the MAX 7, when will it be certified?
Yeah.
Please, I need to know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to plan.
Wow. Okay, James, if folks like what they heard from you today, they want some coaching, they want some help getting through training,
You
getting
need
a
a
job.
marionette when you're in training.
Exactly. The puppet master behind the scenes. We have a special link in the show notes to get you right to James's calendar. Scroll down, click on that, and don't wait until it's too late.
We need to get another link to get you on Eileen's calendar so she can figure out what's going on over there.
Yeah. So the link in the show
get her
notes.
on this show.
So the link in the show notes actually does get them an opportunity to talk to Eileen. We do appreciate patience. It is quite busy right now. There is a lot of stuff behind the scenes going on hiring wise. So like I said, if folks when they click on that link, they'll get access to a calendar. They'll be able to pick a date from there. So
you're saying as soon as you get offered an interview is when to sign up?
Yeah, that's a great time to sign up.
Start early.
Yeah. Well, no. So the key is right now is most people can't get interviews, right? This is a crawl, walk, run. So what they're doing is they're shooting out 700 resumes, shooting their shot, going nowhere, and then calling up and going, "Hey, it's not working." Yeah, I know.
Which is interesting because a year ago, weren't you having people, they could actually get interviews a lot of times, and then they would blow the interview and then come to you?
That, or honestly, what was happening, it's just funny how this always changes because it during the height of it, it was people were getting job offers, but they weren't getting them where they wanted. So it was not a matter of, hey, can we get you hired? It was a matter of, hey, can we help you get hired where you want to get hired? Now it's switched back to, I need to get hired, right? And now, it will continue to evolve from there. So
crazy.
That's the way it goes. All right, James Onieal, Raven Careers, always appreciate your time. Looking forward to our next session already. The Sherpa.
Thanks, folks.
A Sherpa is who hauls the luggage. Like
he is. Did you hear him? He's hauling the luggage. He's teaching you how to.
Dude,
he's making sure you're studying the right thing.
The Sherpa is the guy that throws your dead carcass to the top of Everest, takes a photo and goes, "He summited," and then drags you back down again.
You did it.
Yeah.
You got your Airbus 320 type. Good luck in IOE.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck on that visual approach, bro.
Probably when you're ready for K2.
All right, James. Great talking to you. See ya.
Thanks.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.